Something happening. There we go. Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to be hosting this event. My name is Camila Leiva. I am the Program and Operations Manager here at the Eastside Freedom Library. And just by a show of hands, how many of you have been here before at the Eastside Freedom Library? Ooh, okay. So many folks who have been here way more than I have probably. So thank you for being back, for coming out on a Friday evening. All of this event came together so quickly. If you're like, wait, I just heard about this today, it's because we've been putting it together very quickly. And as with many things that are happening in our communities right now, this is also a form of rapid response to bring us together to have this really important conversation. So this event, Voices Without Borders, is a joint event by PEN America and the Eastside Freedom Library. And I think it's probably our first time doing an event together, and we have guests that flew in a few hours ago from the UK. We have our New York contingent, and our beloved Kao Kalia Yang, who is our local hero and author, who was key in bringing this all together. So first, I'm here just to introduce Clarice, who will then introduce the panel, and we will move forward that way. All right, so I have the distinct pleasure of saying a few words about Clarice. So Clarice Rosas Sharif is the co-chief executive officer of PEN America. Clarice joined PEN America in 2015 and serves as the co-chief executive officer of PEN America. Rosas Sharif previously worked at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library, where she directed a year-round program of panel discussions, performances, film screenings, and symposia examining the history and culture of the global Black experience. She's originally from Martinique and currently lives in Brooklyn, New York. I will give it over now to Clarice to introduce the rest of the event.
Thank you so much, Camila. It's such a pleasure. I'm in my favorite environment among books and in library environment. It's my true honor to be in community with you, and it's also an honor for PEN America and PEN International to share this moment of connection, having this opportunity to be present with each other, and with a common commitment to defend writers and free expression whenever and wherever they are threatened. We have watched and stood in solidarity with the thousands of people in the Twin Cities who mobilize in peaceful resistance. Local writers and literary communities have stepped forward to document, reflect, protest, and sustain their communities through story and solidarity. We also honor the memory of the ones we lost, you lost, of course, Renee, Nicole Good, and Alex Pretty. Tonight, our panelists will discuss the role of writers in these times and the power of solidarity. The formidable Toni Morrison once said, "This time is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. And as writers and artists, we speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal." Our visit to your community, to Minnesota, to the Twin Cities, affirmed this idea that writers are witnesses, storytellers, and connectors. They are essential in these moments when human rights and democratic values are under pressure. So I'm also very honored tonight to welcome two special guests and our readers. And I'll first introduce our first reader, Hawra Alnabi, who is actually Hawra Alnabi and Dr. Jonas Attilus will read, and they both participated in a refugee workshop, writers' workshop, that was led by one of our panelists, Kao Kalia Yang. So we are honored to have them bring some of their writing here tonight. And our first reader, Hawra, was born in southern Iraqi village and at age 3 fled Iraq with her family after the uprising against Saddam Hussein's regime and the execution of her grandfather. At the age of 8, she and her family were granted refugee asylum in the United States. She's now writing her family's story, her memories of the camp and their early years in America. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Hawra. Thank you.
Good evening. Do you hear me? Okay. The journey to freedom. After a long 7-hour drive in a school bus, bouncing over dry roads and stretching endlessly across the desert, we finally reached Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. The city shimmered into view from the desert like a mirage brought to life. Riyadh felt like stepping into an entirely different world, with its towering buildings casting long shadows over bustling streets filled with honking cars and hurried strangers. It pulsed with energy, so full of life, noise, and movement. For an 8-year-old who had spent the last 5 years in quiet isolation, confined within a barricaded refugee camp in the heart of the desert, it was both overwhelming and exciting. We spent the night there, half dazed by the sudden change. The next morning, still carrying the weight of our past, we were taken to King Khalid International Airport, our gateway to somewhere new. It was my first time in an airport, and the first time I was to fly on a real airplane. The memory of the U.S. Army planes that had taken us from Safwan, a border city between Iraq and Kuwait, where the U.S. Army had established a base, to the camp in Saudi Arabia was still fresh in my mind. I hadn't liked that experience at all. As we waited at the airport gate, I felt sick to my stomach, thinking over and over about the American warplanes. I was only 3 years old then, but I remembered vividly the soldiers loading all of us onto those unfriendly aircraft and the bumpy flight. I had held tightly with fear to my mother's leg the entire time of the flight, staring at the strange men with their machine guns pointed in our direction. The thought of flying again made me nervous and scared. Alongside my nervousness, I was also mesmerized by the rush of people around me. I watched them move through the terminal, Saudi civilians, businessmen, families, and children. Their lives were nothing like mine. It was the first time I had seen what I thought of as normal people, people who hadn't spent the last 5 years of their lives trapped in what was called a refugee camp, but what we knew was an open-air prison in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but dust and despair stretching as far as the eye could see. I couldn't help but stare, feeling like an outsider in a world that seemed so far removed from my very own. I looked at my family. My grandmother, 61, was still tall and slender, draped in her black Iraqi abaya. She was the matriarch, the glue that held us together. She was still mourning her husband, who had been brutally executed in the market square 5 years earlier by Saddam Hussein's regime. As if 34 bullets had not been enough, she arrived at the scene to find them looting his body of all his possessions. I looked at my young mother, the mother of 6 children, her face worn by the exhaustion of those harsh years. A quiet sadness seemed to surround her like a halo. She had fled with her husband with no chance to say goodbye to her mother, her sisters, or her brother. She did not know if any of them were still alive. I looked at my father, the eldest of the siblings, a man who had been forced to fight in 2 wars he never believed in nor supported, but had to endure them for the safety and well-being of his family. When I looked at him, I remembered his words to us back in the camp. "I promise you, when we go to America, I will take you to the zoo and the amusement park," he had said. Places we had only ever seen on television, not knowing they truly existed in real life. As we waited, the minutes dragging by before our flight, I thought about the people we left behind in the camp. The farewell kept replaying in my mind. The day before, early in the morning, all the families who were leaving gathered at the bus station. We were joined by friends, people the desert had shaped into family over the past 5 years. Tears flowed freely as we hugged and said our goodbyes. It was a bittersweet moment. Bitter because we had to leave so many behind in that confined camp, yet sweet because at last we were being freed from it. Then the gate agents made the announcement that it was time for us to board. As nervous as I was, with my heart pounding hard against my chest, I was also filled with excitement. The moment had finally come for us to leave Saudi Arabia forever. My fear of the airplane and my anticipation for a new life tangled together, and for a moment I didn't know which one would win. We boarded the plane, and I immediately felt a sense of relief. We were greeted by friendly flight attendants. Their warm smiles and kind faces welcomed us abroad. With its neat rows of seats, soft lighting, and welcoming crew, and most importantly, no American soldiers with machine guns in sight, this was nothing like the American warplane from my past. In that moment, I let go of my fear and chose to focus on the excitement of what was ahead. I sat near the window with my aunt, her husband, and their 2-month-old daughter, the youngest member of our family and the last to be born in the camp. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing that we were about to take off. My heart raced as the plane began to speed down the runway, and in an instant, we were lifting off the ground. I looked out the window as the desert faded away beneath us, taking with it the refugee camp, Saudi Arabia, and the 5 long years of struggle we endured. That chapter of our lives, painful and exhausting, was finally closed. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. We were leaving everything behind, drifting further and further away from our beloved home country, Iraq, but a new chapter was beginning. We were on our way to freedom, freedom beyond the barricaded camp in the desert, freedom from an oppressive regime, freedom from a painful past. We were on our way to a new life, to a future we could hardly even imagine. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And now I introduce our panelists with short introductions so we can dive in. So Kao Kalia Yang, who needs no introduction in this room, but I will introduce her, is an award-winning Hmong American teacher, speaker, and writer. She lives in St. Paul, Minnesota with her family. Next to her, Burhan Sönmez is an award-winning novelist and lawyer from Turkey and the president of PEN International, and flew in just today to join us. His novels have been translated into more than 40 languages. And Dinaw Mengestu is the author of 4 award-winning novels, and he was recently elected as the president of PEN America's board. Thank you so much, all 3 of you, for participating in this conversation. I'd like to start with you, Kalia. Minnesota has been a place of refuge for immigrant and refugee communities. And I wanted to just start with asking, what does it mean to hold this conversation here in a state with such a layered history of migration, but one that has recently suffered so much? What do you hope Dinaw and Burhan will bring back to our Pan America members here in this country, but also across our global network?
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful question. Hawra, first and foremost, thank you for honoring us with your story and your truth. My heart cries with yours. I am so I'm so honored to have you all here. This is the Eastside Freedom Library, but this was my childhood library. This was one of the original Carnegie libraries. As a poor kid who I live on the east side, but I also grew up on the east side. And growing up, I always thought that one day, if I ever became college educated, if I ever got a good job, then I would move everybody away. But I found myself missing this place that has made me. The broken bottles on the streets, the corner laundromat, all of it. I missed the place. I missed the people. The east side of St. Paul, where you're at, is the most demographically diverse segment of our capital city. It is also the poorest part of the capital city. Lots of refugees, generations of immigrants have called this place home. What is so important for me as this kid who reached for the books first from these very shelves and to be here again is this understanding. The Hmong came here. My family came here July 27, 1987. I was 6.5 years old. I didn't know A, B, and C. At my very first school, the teacher said, say your ABCs, and I said A, B, and C. And she shook her head and said, no, say all of them. And I said A, B, and C again. And I'm beginning with this story because I look and I see all these educators in this room, educators who've educated generations of children like me, refugee children, who came here with A, B, and C. Growing up here, poor on the east side of St. Paul. We were told a lot of things. Poor refugee children, particularly girls like me, didn't make it to college. And in college, we don't graduate. Statistically, we don't do well. But here, because of these educators, who every time I made a mistake on the page, they would put a squiggly mark and a big old question mark, and the question is always, what do you mean to say? You send a little girl chasing after meaning, you create a writer in the process. And so I get to sit here with all of you, and it's such an honor, but it's such a sadness that you've come here because of everything that's going on. Minnesota is not high in diversity, but we are #1 in secondary refugee resettlement in the city. In the cities, you have the biggest Hmong populations, the concentrations, Tibetans, Eritreans, Somalis, Karen, I can go on and on. Because of the churches, the community organizations, because of a government that believes, understands, here locally, that unless you're native, we all come from this somewhere to call this place home. As somebody who's come here a long ways to call this place home, from the age of 6, I love this place. And I'll tell you what I love about this place. I love the fact that here in these cities, when I drive, I don't have to look far for Hmong. We live in a world where there is no map with a Hmong land on it. Hmong, like my ancestors before me, is a mountain I carry in my heart. When I look in the mirror, sometimes I'm the only Hmong person I know, in a space, in a place. But I think what I love about this place is, my husband's sitting here. We lived in Minneapolis. We lived right near where George Floyd was killed. Where he died was where we fell in love. And that taught me something very important about place, about space. The places and spaces that teach us how to love also kill us. They kill us indiscriminately. They kill us because of our accents. They kill us because of the color of our skin, because of the texture of our hair. But I know that many, many generations from now, there will be another couple walking those very same streets, holding hands, fighting to be together, fighting to find a way forward into a story that they hope will be happy, a beautiful love story. And that's what matters. On these streets, it taught me how to love, how to fight for what matters to me. And what matters profoundly to me are the stories, the underrepresented stories, the stories about people who've come a long ways to share in place, to share with their hearts. I come from people without a lot of things. So my mom and dad have always said, it's Christmas, and what we have to give you are our words and our tears. These are our gifts to each other. These are the gifts that I've given the page. This morning I read a book called Home on the Page, and it's about a young Hmong girl who faces discrimination. And everybody says, go home. For her father, home is a song. For her mother, home is a garden. For her grandmother, it's a story cloth that she stitches again and again and again. For me, it's always been the page, where I do not feel other people's impatience, where I do not feel the ticking clock of time, where I know that the conversations I'm having are conversations across time and place, and they're in support of something that matters. In every refugee child's heart, I think there's a hunger for peace, a hunger for love, a hunger for belonging, and sometimes we forget and we think we need a law to give us these things. But we don't. We don't. Welcome is the gift that we give each other. It's a gift that one human being can give another. And I'm here, and so many other refugees have made this place home. So many immigrants have made this place home because we understand that we belong because we belong to each other. That's what I want you to take back. Here in Minnesota, a state, that a lot of people think is flyover country, a place that is pretty white. But as Dinaw and Liesl saw this morning, we went to Tsuki Elementary. Of all of the St. Paul public schools, it was the most heavily impacted. More students went virtually in that school than anyone else. Look at their smiles. Look at their joy. Look at the place that they've found here in cold Minnesota and the warmth that we've traveled forth from that moment carrying in our hearts. Dinaw said this morning, I still carry that energy. That energy has made this life and this writer possible. That's what's important to the story.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. And of course, Burhan and Dinaw, feel free to jump in and respond. I was going to turn to you and ask you to talk about your own writing. You both write beautiful stories, but also stories of migration, displacement, political upheaval, and how the stories that you are writing, how do you feel that you're bearing witness on either a moment in time, on human experiences, universal stories? And so just if you could just start with your own writing and what you hope that you're bringing with your stories.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. We write stories, but we have our own story that we haven't written yet. Thank you for this question. Let me tell you my story of my journey of becoming a refugee, a foreigner in a faraway land. I'm from Turkey. I come from Kurdish origin, and I was a very successful and active human rights lawyer at the peak time of Kurdish civil war in Turkey. If you are a human rights lawyer, that means you are helping people who need help, but you always know that you might be one of them very soon. And it didn't last long, and then they came to me. I survived an assassination attempt, very heavily wounded, and then got sentenced in Turkey. I found myself as an asylum seeker, refugee in Britain. Because my health was very bad, I was about to die. I had some operations, and when I realized that I had to go to abroad, go to Britain, and probably I will die there, never come back. I went home, my parents, of course I didn't tell them anything. They don't know anything about my health situation because they see me once a year. And I sat with my mother 1 week. I spent 1 week only with her. And I asked her to tell me every story she told me when we were young in Kurdish, because Kurdish language was banned officially for about 100 years. Imagine you have your language, but it's banned. And I taped everything she said. Then I went abroad with those tapes, with stories. They are there, and you are a human rights lawyer, and you are wounded, and you would like to be a new person in a new land, but you have no hope for your physical, let's say, survival. And 6-7 years I took treatment thanks to organizations and people like, we gathered here now. Among many beautiful organizations, I need to mention one based in London called, now they changed their name, it's called now Freedom from Torture Center. They provide free medical support for the victims of torture coming from all around the world. They helped me, they saved my life. And thanks to them, now I'm alive, I'm here. And when I was there in Britain trying to learn English, I had zero English when I went there. And understand new people and try to earn some money. because you can't be lawyer anymore there because your certificate is not recognized. Then I started to write stories imitating my mother's voice. Still, my first novel is kind of, repeating a short story of my mother in a long way. And after many years, then some other things happened, and I found myself as a writer, then got involved with Pen International, because I feel that myself, I was born to fight for other people. Because when I needed help, people did things for me. So now I know that there are so many people around the world. It's not only today, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when we look at the history. And it's a bad feeling at some point. We may think that, oh, history repeating itself in a bad way, because always there is trouble, there is problem. But we have to look at it in that way, maybe. We know the evil or the oppression, the brutality has a long history, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years ago. But on the other hand, we know that the resistance has a good history as well. So in this history, which part are we standing on? So we are on the part of resistance for the good of people, for the good of children, women, workers, foreigners, for everyone. It's just a free choice. It's a free choice, totally up to us. What to do, what to feel, what to read, what to share with our friends, with family. And then I found myself now at this age, at this place. Am I happy? Yes, I'm so happy. We suffered a lot, but in the end we know that we have made right choices. Right choice doesn't mean that always pleasure and happiness. It has price to pay, and sometimes we have to be ready to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Burhan.
I was thinking back to the original question, Clarice, and the idea of witness and writing, and we're only here for 2 days. You worried, like, what are we going to understand or be able to see in such a short amount of time? But obviously, this morning was like really kind of a phenomenal moment, and you see what people can make, right? What a community can make, and there's something remarkable inside of that, because you look around at the rest of the country and you think, my God, what are we doing? And then you can hold what this school, these children, this community, kind of in contrast to that. And so you realize that there actually is, and there will be, all of these wonderful reasons to continue to believe and have hope and trust that, we are better than this moment, and that this moment is not who we actually really are. And yet at the same time, I also keep thinking, well, but the news cycle will pretend as if this ends, because they're gone. But the consequences will always kind of linger for a really long time. And what happens when people aren't paying attention? And what happens to communities when all of that kind of fear and mistrust that has been there for quite a while is now kind of been pulled out into the open, because we made that as well. And, I was thinking when I first began writing, I think, my first novels, I couldn't write characters that looked anything like me because there just didn't seem to be that space in. You couldn't write literature and have characters who did not have names that could be easily pronounced. You would be sort of put off into a different section. And that's, I think has changed. But after a moment, I began to think, well, what I was doing was I was kind of like writing my way into America. And it began to make I began to think, well, I'm home now here, right? I can put characters who have a name very similar to mine. I can put characters whose lives mirror my family's lives. And in doing so, I will become and I will feel sort of more whole inside of this place. I'll be able to see myself reflected not only in my family, but in the literature, and others will feel the same thing. And I do think there's a kind of truth to that, But this idea of witnessing, I think writers if we witness something, it's a very slow, it's a very slow camera shutter, right? We're not very good, I think, at making sense of the instant moment, but of maybe the long kind of slow reflection that takes a long time to kind of understand. And I think it's been like 15 or 20 years, and I've felt more and more over the course of everything I write the sense of fear. There's been a kind of increasing anxiety about our place in this world and the precarity of what it means to be here, and some of it sort of economic, certainly, and watching the challenges that have come, but also I think a sense of fear of the politics and the fear of what and how easily perhaps our sense of we belong here might be kind of stripped away, and that there are multiple ways of trying to do that. And what we're witnessing right now is a kind of attempt to make people feel like they do not belong. And that is a really sort of powerful and long-term and kind of difficult thing to recover from. And I think they're doing it by their policies, but I also think they're doing it by erasing our books from shelves, by making us feel like certain stories shouldn't be told, shouldn't be read, shouldn't be written, by making you afraid to go to school, to pick up your kids. And all of those things aren't just sort of policy, right? They are intended to do something to how we understand and live in this world, and how we understand our place in it, and whether or not we imagine that we will continue to belong to this country. And you think, well, the antidote to that, to some degree, is to make stories that will outlive this moment, right? Because this will sort of pass, and there has to be something on the other side of that that will kind of both pay attention and call out what has happened here, because it can happen, and probably versions of this will happen again. So what do we have to do to remind ourselves about that? To remember that it didn't just happen in the past, 2 years or 4 years. It's been sort of building for a while. And how do we make sure that we don't do that again? But also, how do we remember that, we helped make this country, and all of us together helped do that, right? And so, so I think I sit sort of, back and forth between this sense of like real sort of sorrow, and also a kind of relentless optimism and belief that that's not the final word. Only because it can't be the final word, and because every once in a while you get proof, and it's 200 kids sitting in front of you, and they are telling you right there, like, this is not the final word, and you have no room or right to believe that it is. So.
Thank you, Dina. And I guess following up on what the three of you touched on, I think in the face of fear, right, or in the face of all these signals that are coming through telling us that, we don't belong, irrespective of who we are. Sometimes we're in spaces and they say, you don't belong. So with the three of you, you exist and you practice as a writer in different communities, in different parts of the world, and in different parts of the country. And I wonder, on a very kind of pragmatic and practical level, how do you build your sense of safety, and what does it mean to build that sense of safety with the members of your community, the writing community, the literary community, but also the community of people you live with? And so I'm curious to get a sense of a little bit of what it looks like, depending on where three of you are, geographically speaking.
I think back to the Toni Morrison quote that you started with, that there is no room for fear. And I will be very honest with you all, I've been very afraid in the last 2 months. I've been afraid for my parents who have thick accents, who can easily be targeted. I'm afraid for my sister-in-law who is new in America. I'm afraid for so many other people beyond myself. I'd agreed to do a resistance reading, an anti-ICE reading, and I was perfectly fine doing it, but I went to visit my mom and dad, and my dad said to me, we didn't think that the sky we lived under could fall on us. We didn't think that the earth we walked on could throw us off. We were children in the high mountains of Laos. Government officials never rarely visited. And then the trucks came, and the bullets came, and the bombs started raining down because Laos was the most heavily bombed nation in the world, only the world didn't know it. My father said, they will come, and they would take you. And when they take you, I would die. My children looked at me in fear, and they said, Mommy, you're a naturalized citizen. And Operation Metro Surge is also turned into something else. We hear it on the news. You're a naturalized citizen, Mommy, they can take you. In your books, you say America isn't perfect. You say that America came to the mountains of Laos, recruited 32,000 Hmong men and boys to fight and to die on America's behalf, that they killed 2/3 of your people. Mommy, when they get you, this administration will say that all of these things are lies and they will kill you. And so I had to write my friends, my brave writer friends, and say that I'm sorry. I will miss out on this one, out of respect for my mom and my dad and all of the people that I love. These hands are tiny, you know, but every time we come to a sudden stop, it is these hands that immediately move toward my children as if I can protect them. My grandma, who came here as an old woman, she somehow escaped this war that decimated our people. The Hmong ran from Laos without knowing that there was a declaration of genocide against us. The people in the big cities knew. Gausam Pathet Lao had said, it is necessary to extirpate down to the root the Hmong minority. But the Hmong in the mountains did not know. They did not know. And they had hoped that they could survive, even after the wake of a war. I don't know how much this country wants a writer like me. I don't know that this country loves the Hmong people, because I saw with everybody else on TV the Hmong mother who was taken for 3 weeks without cause. I saw the Hmong grandfather who was taken in handcuffs without a shirt on, with a pair of shorts in the cold of a Minnesota winter. His grandson's blanket hastily thrown on his back. And nobody knows, but that man said his grandchild watched the whole thing, that the grandson was in the window looking out and crying, but nobody stopped to ask. Nobody wondered why. It's going to take a long time before that child can speak about what they saw and what they heard, what they experienced. So yeah, I write and work with the fear around me. Toni Morrison, who I love, who I respect entirely, because like so many other Hmong writers, we didn't have a lot of examples in English literature, in American literature to work from. And so I've always looked at the margins, to the writers who were pushed to the side, to many women writers of color, to somehow shape a way of moving and navigating in the world. But no, we work with the fear. My people have always worked with the fear. We've lived in America with the fear. We've lived in Thailand and Laos with the fear. I was born with the fear. In Ban Vinai refugee camp when I was born, every time my mom had to temper that flame because we couldn't afford the precious oil, I would cry. I was born with a fear of the darkness. That is why I work and I strive for the light.
Thank you.
It's an official thing we do.
Okay. I have right to tell myself that I should be brave, in difficult times. But I don't have right to tell other people that they should be brave. I think, as a human being, my responsibility to other people is to build something to support them in difficult time. We are human. We have right to be in fear, to be nervous about tomorrow. In 1930s, when Nazis came in Europe, suddenly everyone left Germany. intellectuals. Of course, as organizations, pan-international, we were very well organized across Europe, everywhere. We started to take writers, intellectuals out of Germany and then out of Europe. We were successful in many cases, like, let's say, around the same time, we remember there was Spanish Civil War going on. The first international campaign we organized was the case of Arthur Koestler. He was a very well-known writer at the time. He was arrested by fascist Franco groups, and then we organized, and we succeeded. He was freed. So our job is to organize this. But at the same time, we couldn't manage to save Gabriel Garcia Lorca's life in the same land. That means we are doing good things, but we need to do it more. And around the same time, one of the striking example for me is German Jewish philosopher Walter Benjamin. His friends already managed to come to States, like Adorno, Hannah Arendt, all those people. But Walter Benjamin stayed behind in France. When Nazis came, he tried to escape. He got information from Adorno in the States. They said, come, everything is ready. Come to Spain and then reach a port and we will take you. But on the border, they were stopped, an army was approaching. He had no chance, he committed suicide. Now, when we think all these kind of stories, we feel urge, what can we do something, for other people? And as organization, pan-international, we have 139 country centers at the moment, one in America, 40,000 members. We always talk about these issues, cases that not successful yet. That means a writer is in prison in China or in Belarus or in Afghanistan, in Turkey. But on the other hand, we should know and believe that the struggle and the movement of solidarity, a successful act. I can give you a rough figure. 70% of our cases end successfully. Just give me just one example. 2 months ago, for example, in Belarus, 124, I'm not sure about the number, but 120 something prisoners were released from prison. Among them, PEN members and Nobel Peace Laureate Ales Bialiatski and so many other people. They were not released just for the, let's say, good heart of those people, ruling the country. It's thanks to international campaign, solidarity movement everywhere. These kind of things happening, in my country, in Turkey, in Egypt, in Bangladesh, in some part of Latin America. We keep going, and they are afraid of us. Simply because we don't have anything. We don't have armies. We don't have guns. At home, we just sit, write a book. In the past, we had pens. Now we have some keyboards. But you may find yourself in prison next day just because of something you are writing. But you say, what is this? I'm not a so important person. I'm not a big man or woman. But then the other come, they say, no, you are a big man or big woman. You are very important. We will put you in prison. We will murder you. We will silence you. And then we understand the importance of not ourselves as a person, but the work that we are doing for society, for humanity, for people. Writing a love story for children, it might be dangerous for people. 7 or 8 years ago, when Turkish army, member of NATO, went into northern Syria to invade Kurdish land, we, about 100 writers, released a statement, just one sentence, which just said, "We want peace." Same week, the national prosecutor shared with the press, said that the word peace is a terrorist discourse. Anyone using it, we will do everything. And then we found our names, our pictures on the front page of right-wing media. Even the word peace, the word love, the word solidarity is sometimes, or most of times, is something dangerous for them. We should know that in this world, there are them and us. And writing is, we see this building, these books, and come here and talk. That means we are building a world in a different form against the current world that they say this is the only option. You have to just obey and follow it. And we say that there are so many books and they mention endless options. Okay, let's try something else for the good of environment, or for good of women, or black people, or foreigners, whatever it is, for everyone. Is possible? Yes, possible. They don't try, then we should try. That's our work, I believe.
That idea of solidarity, and what we do. So if you have a membership organization and something happens, your members, they get out and they write letters, and in a pen we put our names on a document. They get published, and so you can see all of the people who are there to support you. And that, I think, part of our idea of courage comes from knowing that there are others who stand alongside and behind us, and that makes it possible for us to sometimes be braver than we might obviously be on our own. Early when this administration came in, and some of the first sort of roundups were sort of happening, you remember there's a sense of sort of real frustration, because the way we sort of talked about it and represented it, it was always as if things were happening to that group. And oftentimes that is sort of the way I think it was sort of experienced in many places, as, this happened there, and this happens, the immigrant community in that city, and this is the immigrant. And this is where I think something sort of really important happened in Minneapolis. It was one of the, it really felt like a fundamental shift where there stopped being about a them and an us, right? That idea of what was happening, people stopped thinking of it as like, well, it happened to that community, or it happened over there, and it began to feel like it was happening to everyone inside of it. And for those watching us, which is, certainly me, and I think a lot of people around the world, it was expanded, that idea of actually who you consider to be a part of your community, and who you consider to be, to who you hold yourself liable to. And I think that's one of the, when there's a kind of power, it's that power, right? That sense that people have understood that they have more stronger and more important connections, and they cannot be so easily split or factioned off, and certainly not by a government that wants to do exactly that. And so that becomes courage, right? It becomes a way of imagining something certainly better than what we have right now, but also you remember that there are all of these people who you might not even know, who actually might go out on the streets with you and for you. So
I want to just mention that we'll take a few questions from the audience. So I'll ask one more and then turn to you, the audience. So if a writer in the audience, but I think a writer, but it could be an educator, librarian, like, what if you were to ask you, where do you find the inspiration? What are the writers, or what are the writings that you're turning to in this moment as either a source of inspiration or as a way of maybe learning, from the past to understand this particular moment. Are there writers or particular piece of writing that you would want to share with our audience today?
You can hear now. Only there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if I have it. If I can find it very quickly. It says it would be a few lines of a poem that many people might know. I'm not going to be able to find it, but it's Adrian Rich's An Atlas of a Difficult World, and it's a phenomenal poem. But a large part of it is the voice of the narrator says, in many different ways, I know you are reading this by standing under the lone street lamp on and she keeps extending this voice outwards, talking about, I know you are reading this. I know you are standing in a room where too much has happened for you to bear. I know you are reading this in a room with a valise left open on the bed. I know you are reading this standing broken where you are. And it's a constant sort of reaching out that the text is sort of doing, and it's constantly saying, like, I know you, but not just once, but over and over and over, because obviously to know is really difficult and really hard, and the poem is offering you a way to sort of know you through all of these different versions and iterations of yourself, including the worst, and sometimes the happiest, and sometimes the loneliness, and oftentimes the loneliest, because it's exactly in those sort of moments when you actually have literature and you have stories and you have community, and sometimes the only community you have is just that text and that poem, and there's a consciousness behind that is basically saying, like, yeah, I'm writing this with you and for you, and wherever you are when you read this, there is somebody who wrote this thinking very much exactly of you in that space far away from me. And yet that distance and that time kind of collapse in that poem, and suddenly what should be and feels like a difficult world gets a little bit more bearable. Yeah. So if you have it, it's a phenomenal little poem.
Thank you, Dinaw. Burhan Kalia, yeah.
To be honest, I didn't understand the question very well. Because there is not a straight answer to that question.
And you don't have to answer, Burhan, if you don't want to answer my question.
I can speak about anything.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, I was more in poetry reading. One of the poems I remember in Turkish was saying something like this. A poem is not water in the bottle, not bread in the bag, not a bullet that you need during the war. But a poem can help you keep going when you don't have water, when you don't have bread, when you don't have bullet. I think this is something that we feel about the power of art. It is not only poetry or novel. One of the things is, I think, when we read a book or listen to a music, we have something more than that. That's why every reading is a special. Now we all read, let's say, Dostoevsky's book, Crime and Punishment, but every book is different interpretation because we are different person, each of us. And the thing we imagine beyond the work of art is, I think, one of the main elements of human evolution. Why the first humans draw something on the cave wall, or they started to sing as soon as they started to use language. The thing beyond is one of the perfect example for myself is In 1920s, Mona Lisa painting was stolen at the Louvre Museum. For 2 years it was missing. They couldn't find it. And it was the first time Louvre Museum started to have queues. People coming to see not the Mona Lisa, but the empty wall that Mona Lisa was there. Kafka was among them. They came to see empty wall. They look at empty wall and they say that Mona Lisa was here, she's not anymore. That's the meaning of art for humanity. That imagination, that space, that void is our future, our utopia. That's why we always talk about something beyond the reality that's given to us. I think it was Oscar Wilde said that a map of the world without place of utopia is always missing. That's why in every map we should put our own utopia and fight for it, even though it may sound very much imaginative.
Thank you, Burhan.
I'm thinking about Mrs. Gallatin because you talked about the Mona Lisa. On the east side of St. Paul, particularly in the public schools, there's not a lot of kids who've gone to the Louvre. And so I was a kid, and Mrs. Gallatin was my 9th grade English teacher, and she and her husband had gone to France, and she came back, and we were all waiting for this great description. And Mrs. Gallatin said, "The Mona Lisa is the biggest disappointment of my life." And we're all sitting there, and she says, "It's so small." And we're all sitting there, and I remember her, this red-faced teacher who scared my older sister because my older sister loved mascara and would put on so much mascara that her eyes could barely open. And so she'd sit there and look like she was falling asleep. And so when I was going to go into Mrs. Gallatin's class, my sister has said to me, "Don't put on mascara." She doesn't like kids with a lot of mascara. And so I didn't put on mascara. And I sat in the front, and I didn't talk either, but I would follow Mrs. Gallatin with my eyes. And when I didn't understand something, somehow she could see it on my face. And she would go over the material again and again. And at some point, I thought I was reading her brain because I would know what to anticipate from all of her tests. And so I thought we were connected mentally. And then I did a few mind experiments, and that failed. But I remember when you talk about sources of inspiration, we lived in this moldy house just half a block from here, or half a mile from here. And the house was moldy. So every winter we would start getting sick. From September all the way to March, our noses would run, and we would just start coughing like crazy. And in Mrs. Gallatin's classroom, whenever my nose was running, I tried to suck it in. It's what you do when you don't have Kleenex. And so I do the whole time. And Mrs. Gallatin started offering me Kleenex, the Kleenex box. She would put it close to my desk. And I thought, oh, she notices more than what I'm doing on the page. She notices something about my body. Mrs. Gallatin, who asked me to write my very first hard essay, it was about Romeo and Juliet, and it was a story about the question was, is Romeo and Juliet a story of love or lust? And in the 9th grade, I hadn't yet experienced love. It would take me a very long time, Erin Hokinson. And so I didn't know. My friend had a boyfriend, but then they would just call and breathe on the phone. And my mom and dad, they've been married a long time, but whenever we didn't have enough money, whenever things went wrong, my mom would say to my dad sometimes, "If I hadn't been so stupid in that jungle, I would have never walked away with you and left my own mother. And in a different life with a different person, I would have had a better chance at everything." And my dad would just sit there sad. And so in this essay I wrote for Mrs. Gallatin, it took me all night to type 2 fingers on the old typewriter. I said that we will never know if the story of Romeo and Juliet is a story of love or lost because they never had the chance. Because my mom and my dad, who've been together all of these years, who wake up every day to fight the same fight, somehow rest in the same bed. Not because of the flowery language or the big X, but because these are the circumstances of their life. And I think that in that there is something called love. And then I started worrying immediately whether I got it right or wrong. Mrs. Gallatin would tell me if I got it wrong. But that day, she stopped me in the hallway and she said, Kao Yang, you're going to do well in college. Nobody had ever said that to me before. And I said, why? And she said, because you can read and you can write. And that's what you need to do well in college, Kao Yang. You're going to do well in college when you get there. I'm inspired by that woman, by that human being who year by year gets older and older. But she just wrote me last week. I was getting worried about her, and then she wrote me out of the blue. Yeah, we're connected. It is all of these connections that I think inspire me. You know, when I was just a kid in Ban Binai refugee camp, I couldn't go to school because the schools are overcrowded. There was 40,000 of us, and there was just not enough teachers and facilities. And so all the older kids would go to school, but although I turned 6 there, I'd sit and my uncle would stretch out his arm, and he'd say, every piece of hair on my arm, that's a tree. He'd hold his knuckles. We didn't have books. And he'd say, this is the mountain range that I came from. My veins, these are the rivers of my youth. Whole worlds emerge on that stretch of an arm. And now he's an old man. My uncle is an old man. And when he holds out his arm, the muscle moves away from the bone. And I can see how small his bone is. It's living paper. We are living paper. And so when I think about it that way, how can I not be inspired? He's gone through a lot, my uncle, including a car accident where now Target is always Target, you know, and certain words will always come out the French way because Laos was a French colony. And he will talk about the French bread that he once got a taste of in the capital city, and how he'll never forget the crunch and then the softness of that bite. That inspires me, that after all of these years, after everything, the bite of that French bread is still alive on his tongue, again, living paper. And so I don't look so much to the writers of the great books. I look to the people who remind me that the stories of our lives are worth living and that they too are great, if to nobody else in the world than to us. In every place I go, they say that she is a Hmong American writer. They say she is a refugee writer. I don't get to be an American writer. I don't get to be an American writer, but you know what? This morning at Tsuki Elementary, they asked me to sign their hands with a Sharpie, a permanent marker. And they said, you're like Taylor Swift. You know, that's inspiring to me. I don't have to be a Taylor Swift to Tracy Kelsey, but to 700 Hmong kids on the east side of St. Paul. They gave me living flesh, living paper. For them, how can I not write? For them, the stories must live on, must continue forth. And so, inspiration galore.
Thank you, Kalia. Wow. I said we would take questions. I looked at the time. We will take questions, but how about this? If you can raise your hand if you have a question. I think maybe we can have 2 questions and then we'll respond to them at the same time. So if somebody has a question? Oh, I'm not forgetting. That's why I said, let's take 2 questions at the same time. We'll respond and then we'll do a reading. Yes, what is your question?
I want to say, knowing you as you are as an author,
Oh, sorry. Here you go.
my question is, knowing what you know now as an author and as an activist, civil activist through the work that you're writing, if you could go back to your childhood when you were little, and with the trauma of as a refugee or as an immigrant or however face you have, you were broken at that time. What would you say to yourself at that time as a broken person?
Thank you. So let's hold that question. Let's take one more, and then you can choose to answer any more.
I guess I work here at the library. My name's Lucid. I don't so much as have a question, but a comment. I'm that guy. But I just remember you said something earlier about how, like, you know, America doesn't want you here, and definitely, like, yeah, the administration and stuff. But you know, I'm from Moorhead, Minnesota, like a very, yeah, yes. So and yeah, so you know, a pretty white area of Minnesota. But like, I don't know. I just remember growing up, and like my dad and my mom used to live in LA, so he learned how to make tortillas, like with the tortilla press. We had like a metal tortilla press. And I wouldn't have gotten that experience if it weren't for the immigrants that he met. So I just want to say, I want you here. I want you all here. And I really appreciate that you're here, because it makes America worth living in. Because I don't want to live with the people in the White House and who support them. So
Thank you. Thank you. I co-sign your comment, even if it was not a question. So what would you say to your child, right? Going back yourself as what you say to that maybe younger child, the writer in you. What would you want to say? And three of you can choose to respond. And then we'll turn to the final reading.
I think I would say I wouldn't share any details, especially details of failed love stories. But I would say it's gonna be great. It's gonna be wonderful. It doesn't matter, you know. There are pains, sorrowful things, but being in this world is a gift for us. You know, as human beings, our history is just, you know, the history of civilization, about 15,000 years old. The history that we know, you know, that settled societies. And it's a very short period of time. We are part of that civilization, and we are doing very interesting things. It's very exciting, full of adventure. We don't have chance to see the future. Only one person or one god played with future, they say. It was Zeus. Because we are writers, we are telling stories now. When Zeus was fighting against, you know, there were different era of gods, titans, and giants. At some point, he felt that he was going to lose fight. And then he searched all the map, the list of people, and he saw that the only person could help and save them was Hercules. But Hercules was not born yet. He was going to be born in the future. And it was the only time that gods played with the time. Zeus went to the future, brought Hercules back. They fought together, they won. Then he left Hercules again in the future. Hercules couldn't remember anything. He thought that it was a dream. We shouldn't tell anything to that little child, but the future is here. It's like a dream, okay? And it's beautiful, full of adventures, and tomorrow morning a new son will be born. This is, you know, famous sentence Wittgenstein wrote in his Tractatus. He says, we cannot be absolutely certain whether the sun will rise or not tomorrow morning. Theoretically, we cannot say that it's 100% sure, but there's a possibility that sun will rise up. It's beautiful to wait and to see that moment. Thank you.
We're going to give you the last word, so I'll go now. You know, when I was young, in that place where Hmong people only got food 3 days out of a week, and we were expected to wait out the years. because Thailand was practicing a humane deterrence policy. They didn't want more Hmong people coming into their country. My father used to say to me, "You are born in an ocean of love so big, your hands have never touched the sides. Your feet has never touched the bottom." If I could talk to young Kalia in all of those moments when she wasn't sure that there would be a future, I tell her, "You're going to be so loved. You're going to be so loved as you've always been loved." I'll tell her what I tell my children. There are thousands of people before you, and you were their dream of a future. And then I would tell them what my father tells me. You're the happy ending that I've been waiting for. That's what I'd say.
That's such a nice note to end on. You know, I think in some ways the things that you want to go back and maybe try to mend from the past are probably the ones that are still sort of there, right? Because I don't always, not because we don't get over them, but because they linger and and in both good and bad ways. And that's a part of what makes, you know, our past lives so important to who we are. Like we learn how to survive and we learn how to endure, and we come out ahead with all these wonderful talents and skills because of what was really difficult. But I also sometimes think, well, there are certain things maybe I wish I didn't know. And that maybe I'm still trying to unlearn. And some of it has to do with certainly like what it means to move through the world in this body. And I think growing up, I didn't understand the challenge that it posed, except that I knew that like I didn't look in the mirror. And when I did, it was not for long. And that for a very long time afterwards, you start trying to find ways to maybe make that body disappear, or you try to find ways to disfigure it, or to kind of neglect it in unintentional ways. And I think you come out of that hopefully still stronger, and you can see it. I don't always know if you needed it. And those are maybe the only things that I look back on, and I do wonder, fuck Hercules, I would keep the past. I would sort of mend the past in those moments, right? But then I also worry that I wouldn't have the ability to see myself and whole, or at least try to now. And that's also a pretty great experience, because you can then at least know that you're trying to get to this other place where you are whole and full and complete, and that means you get to keep working on that. And there's some kind of really wonderful value in that process of like continuous labor, and to not feel settled in that work. So maybe there's a good thing to some of those things that you don't get to heal right away.
Thank you. So before I close, I wanted to introduce our final reading. Final reader, Jonas Attilus, is a psychiatrist who was born and raised in Haiti. After surviving the 2010 earthquake that killed more than 300,000 people, he migrated to Mexico as a refugee. He's currently working on a memoir about the earthquake. And you traveled many hours to come and join us, and I can't wait to hear your reading. Thank you, Jonas.
I step out of my apartment, bootless, glove-tied, wiped in enough layers to guard my Caribbean skin, yet the icy air still found my face, waking me twice in the same morning. It was nearly 40 below, a temperature I didn't know existed when I lived in Haiti, much less one I ever imagined surviving. And yet, here I am. After migrating to Mexico from Haiti as a refugee, after coming to the United States seeking further education, I found myself inside a mental health crisis I didn't create, and an economic crisis people like me are often accused of worsening simply by existing, as if immigrants and US-born Americans are natural adversaries, as if the same forces that extract labors from one do not manufacture poverty in the other. I get into my car. After turning the ignition, I check that a copy of my visa rests in the glove compartment. As I pull onto the street, I monitor the road and my speed. My hand steady the wheel, but it is the feel that hum beneath the engine. Still, I do everything within my power to arrive safely. In Minnesota, traffic stop have turned fatal. A murder have been gunned down in the street, the blood absorbed in the snow, the final breath shaped like plea. There is no time for carelessness. It is a time for vigilance. If I were pulled over, no one would see the psychiatrist heading to serve the underserved, rural Americans and native communities. They will see black. The moment I speak, they will hear immigrant, illegal, until proven otherwise. Those of us not born here, those of us whose ancestors do not resemble those who forced their will onto the first inhabitant of this land, we live in quiet calculus of risk. If I had the luxury of choice, I might stay home as my father advised. I will lie on my couch as my brothers urge. But my patients are waiting. They rely on me. And staying home offers no guarantee, not after an elderly monk man handcuffed and pulled from his house wearing short and sandal, his skin exposed to the merciless cold. Not after the outside children's school filled with tear gas and families were traumatized and brought the light. We no longer ask if, we ask when. So I share my location with trusted friends. If I fall silent and my phone remains, they will know where to search. They hold a copy of my passport, my visa, contact information of my family overseas. Fear has become a second skin. It doesn't block the wind, it settles into our bones. It moves like a shadow, slips into the lung, and leaves no room for breath. So we prepare. Immigrant, people of colors, allies. I park, but remain in the car for a few minutes. Hands resting on the wheel, gathering myself. I wonder how many of my colleagues carry this much before the day even begins. I don't know. My thought drifted back to the voices spilling softly from the speakers. A voice in French, one of the radio programs I listened as a teenager in Haiti. Now it crosses the Atlantic to keep me company in this small Midwestern town. A voice that carries home inside it, a language I rarely speak now, tradition I no longer practice, holidays that passes without ceremony. The podcast become a small dressing over isolation, an echo that insists I'm not alone. At baseline, I carry a quiet exhaustion, the fracture between who I was back home and who I have become. A jagged tear separates what once nourished me from what I now piece together as sustenance here. But when fear runs through our streets and through our veins, that exhaustion deepens. Still, I draw courage from the sound. The broadcast is proof that migration doesn't erase us. No matter how many voices attempted to, we are still here. Our music, our cuisine, our way of loving and gathering women. I turn off the ignition. The cold slams against me. So I hurry to the door and badge in. Inside, I stamp snow from my booth, greet colleagues in the hallway, hang my coat, set down my bag. I log into my computer. A long list of patients waits. I pour water to soften my thought. The higher the heat in the building, the drier the air, the more it leaches moisture from my body. Back at my desk, there is no time to admire the painting on the wall, no time to register the artificial rivers sound piped through the floor to calm us, no time to notice the sharp cleanliness left by the janitorial staff. My first patient is about to arrive. They are here. And I sense immediately that something is off. Though I cannot yet name it, I let them sit, let them speak, let them settle. The anxiety has worsened. They have started drinking again. even while taking medication meant to reduce craving. They want a higher dose, something stronger, a sedative. They cannot tolerate the state of the world anymore. They want relief, escape the news, the violence, the steady stream of dehumanization broadcast in real time. It is too much to hold. They want to be knocked out. And here I am, asked to pathologize what feels like a human response is to sustain harm, to prescribe something potent enough to blur the present, to quiet the alarm. This is a normal reaction, I tell them gently. I will be more concerned if you fell at peace. I will worry more if you move through this as if nothing were happening. As my patient speaks, tension gathers in my own body, palms damp, pulse quickening, as though I am standing inside a story. Vicarious trauma, we call it. Because trauma is never contained within one body, it is communal. When one person is dehumanized, it is never singular. Something in all of us is dragged through the mud. Something splinters. What is unfolding in Minneapolis, what is unfolding in St. Paul is not inevitable. It is not natural disaster. It is manufactured. It is preventable. And in the end, no one truly wins. It should be harder for a life to be taken, harder for a gun to be left in broad daylight, harder for a child to lose the mother, harder for a veteran to lose the person who studies them through the night. This is not normal. And fear at this magnitude is not pathology. It is elemental. When immigrant neighbors are detained without due process, when US-born allies are beaten in the street, anxiety is not dysfunction. It is evidence of conscience. To feel nothing in the face of such violence, that will be the aberration. What unfolds in our state is only the visible symptoms. The unseen spread quietly into homes as rage, into families as silence, into the doctor's office as despair. Trauma is biological. It tunnels beneath the skin, thread through the bloodstream, presses against liver and kidneys, settles in lungs and bone. It metastasizes. The body keeps its own ledger long after the headlines move on. And here we are. My patient and I, two people in a small office trying to outlast the nurse. He's waiting for medication, or at least for help naming what feels unendurable. My patient needs me when I can barely steady myself. They need language when I feel mine frayed. I'm expected to regulate their anxiety while managing my own, to reality test them while I share my live location with friends and keep a copy of my visa in my glove compartment. They have come to see me, a black immigrant from Haiti, when I am the one who sometimes feel more unheard. But I do not say that. As a clinician, I have learned the geometry of boundaries, close enough to care, distance enough to endure. Protect yourself so you can continue to protect others. Yet, in this moment, the structure wavers. The patient is not intruding into my life. Their words are. Their fears are what I rehearse daily, what I anticipate, what I prepare for. My boundaries grow porous. Still, I will not widen the wounds with my own. My mentors taught me about professionalism, about separating the private self from the clinical one. Ethics demand containment, presence without overflow. So I strengthen in my chair. I listen. I measure my words. I offer steadiness, even if I must draw it from some deep, unknown reserve. I promise myself I will tend to my own fear later, tonight, perhaps, if I remember. Because there is a list of patients waiting. They are all waiting. And I am here, black immigrant from a refugee, charged with holding what trembles in others while quieting what trembles in myself.
Merci. Merci, Jonas. Merci. This was so special. I'm supposed to be here and be your moderator, but I'm here. We're here together and we are sharing this incredible moment of generosity, of truth, and of solidarity. That's what I'll bring back to New York, and my colleague. That's what it looks like. We get in a room and we try to be human together and to remind ourselves why we do what we do. So I just want to thank our panelists, Dinaw, Burhan, Kalia. You were so wonderful with your stories, and they'll stay with me, and I'm sure they'll stay with all of us. I want to thank Camilla for hosting us. It was such a joy to get to meet you today. I want to thank my colleagues who are in the room from Pan America, Liesel, DeMarcus, Taslin. They did pull this together very fast, and I'm so glad they did. And then one last thing. If some of you feel like they can donate, if you can, please do so. There's a link. Oh, there's a link on this whiteboard over there. And tonight we would like to raise some funds for an organization, Sempasuchil Collective, and they are working here directly with St. Paul Public Schools to get rent assistance and other things to families that are affected by this moment here. So if you're able to help us, help them. But then, last words, I just want to say merci, thank you.